Festival. And it's also very interesting to notice that after the pandemic, after all the festivals have been shut down for 2 or 3 years due to the pandemic, when they resume, they try to find some other ways to extend their influence. For example, they will have online screening. I think this is also what our festival did in the past few years to attract more audience. And they will also have year-round screening event to kind of keep the momentum and attract the audience into the cinema as often as possible. So here I would also talk a little bit more about what like the extension of the film festival. So this will be talked about more towards the end of my sharing. The third point is about myself. I think it's it's quite interesting that now I work for the festival, and a festival is one of my enthusiastic points. I'm a very frequent film festival goer. Before the pandemic, actually, I went to film festival basically every month. It's part of my job. It's also part of my passion. Other duties that I have in the film industry include film criticism, curation, production, and sales. So I would call myself a film industry slashie. I have been working in film industry for more or less about 8 years, and I've been working in all different sessions of the industry, but my starting point was actually attending the film festival and meeting the like-minded persons and talk about films nonstop with them after the screening. And normally, when I was a student going to the film festival, we would meet each other and meet other film goers and watch like 5 films per day and talk about the films after midnight, something like that. So film festival is really my passion, and I turned my passion into my work, my profession. Since we are going to talk about festivals, I would like to briefly introduce a little bit about the different festival system and like the most important film festival in the world. So fun fact number 1, the beginning of the film festival, the Venice International Film Festival is the oldest film festival in the world. It was founded in 1933. So as you can see, before 1932, so before this date, actually there was no official or no like formal thing called festival, and it was like a pure invention by this Biennale director who actually got the support from the fascist government in Italy in the 30s. And the inaugural festival took place in August 1932 at the Venice Casino on the Lido Island, which is still the main venue of the Venice Film Festival. It features films from various countries, and it was a non-competitive festival in the early years. And the festival aimed at promoting and celebrating the art of cinema on the international stage. So it was an annual event in 1935 and still runs until today. And actually this year it celebrates its 80th anniversary. And the 2 other most important film festivals in the world are Festival de Cannes, Cannes Film Festival, and Berlinale. Cannes Film Festival was established a little bit later than Venice Film Festival. So Cannes was established in 1946. And it's very interesting that Cannes later on has become the most important film festivals of the world due to the importance of the French film industry. So as you can see, like the importance of the film festival really has a very close connection with how developed the local film industry is. So France, as the hub of the film industry in Europe and worldwide, has greatly promoted the reputation and the status of Festival de Cannes, and make this festival the #1, the king of the festival. And the Berlinale, which maybe most of you are more familiar with, was actually the youngest among the 3 main festivals in Europe. And it was established in 1951, according to the advice of a former US military who wanted to establish a West Berlin Film Festival after the World War II. He, in the 50s, actually, he formed a committee that included the members of the Berlin Senate and the German film industry. And together they made this festival happen. And actually, Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca was the very first film that was shown in Berlinale. So this is just like 3 most important film festivals around the world. But actually, there are many, many more festivals in the world. And I would like to, sometimes I call it the film festival hierarchy, because when I work with young directors especially, people talk a lot about the A-list festivals. And at the beginning, I was very confused, and I was like, I only know Berlinale, Cannes, Venice, and what do you mean by A-list festival? And I did a little bit of research and found out that actually there is a list given by the FIAPF, which is the International Federation of Film Producers. This federation, they gave a list of a festival, including 15 competitive feature film festivals. This is the so-called A-list festivals. As you can see in this list, it includes like many important festivals as the Berlinale, Venice, and Cannes that we just talked about, but also many more other festivals. I would just let you read all these festivals' names, but I want to mention that among these 15 film festivals, actually Moscow was an A-list film festival, but due to a political reason, it's like got eliminated from the list. And Fajr, the festival in Iran, was added very recently. So according to the list, below this A-list festival, there is a competitive specialist feature film festival that includes 22 film festivals, for example, Busan, Sydney, Torino, etc. And then the non-competitive feature film festival, which has only 2 festivals, Toronto and Biennale. And then the 4th category is the Documentary and Short Film Festival, which included only 5 festivals, including Clermont-Ferrand and Tampere in Finland. So you can see altogether there are 43 festivals. And what do we actually have in the world? There are infinitive amount of festivals. No one has ever counted how many festivals there are in total in the world. And all year round, there are some events, some festivals happening nonstop with special curations, film programs, and themed showcases, etc., etc. So what I talk now is actually very relevant to the Chinese film and Chinese film industry, because the Chinese films were very firstly introduced to the International Film Festival circuit in 1934. So The Son of Fisherman, Yu Guangqu, is an early Chinese silent film directed by director Cai Chusheng and produced by Lianhua Film Company, which is a company based in Shanghai. And the film, I believe the Chinese audience have seen or at least have heard of this film, because it depicts the life, the struggle, the difficulties that the poor classes have encountered in the old society of China. And a family of fishermen who live alongside the river, they had to go to the street in order to make a living. And this film is with the style of so-called realism and depict the real reality of the China in the old society back then, went viral, if we may use the term nowadays, in the 30s, and it was really a successful film. It went to the cinema in China for 84 days straight and got really a very good critic feedback, and people loved it. So that was the moment when the Moscow actually invited this film in 1935 in February and March. It actually was the Soviet Union Film Committee and the Soviet Cineast Filmmaker Association who kind of invited all the films around the world to showcase themselves in Moscow. And actually, there are 31 countries who have accepted the invitation. And in China, the Chinese delegation also selected 8 films, including Song of the Fisherman. They brought this film to Moscow, and on the screening, actually all the representatives from different countries watched the film, and they got a special event to give out all the awards. So in that year, there were 10 films that got awards, and Song of the Fisherman actually got the 4th place, but it also counted as an award, and it's actually the very first award that a Chinese film has ever got on the international level. So it's very interesting to notice that this film got the recognition internationally, and the Moscow Film Exhibition, back then it was called the Moscow Film Exhibition, and then later on this film exhibition turned out to be the Moscow International Film Festival. So you can see the continuation of a film event to a film festival. And when I was doing my research, it shocked me that, remember the year 1935 when they got the prize in Moscow, and then all the way to the 70s. Actually, I couldn't or I can't really spot the evidence of Chinese films going overseas, which means from the 30s to the 70s, due to different reasons and different historical events, somehow the communication or the exchange between the Chinese film industry and the outside world has been cut off. I do believe that there were some unofficial exchanges happening during this period of time, but this was never on a large level, a large scale, or it was not significant enough to be documented. So this was really a shocking fact that I found, but if you give it a second thought, it's actually not that shocking, because first of all, most of the Western film festivals were established after the Second World War, which means maybe in the 50s and 60s. And second of all, like in China during the Cultural Revolution, not so many films were produced, and there was a lack of resources and money and fundings to support the continuous production of films. So to speak, that not so many films were produced, and there was no way to send the film to the festivals. So it's not such a shocking effect if you think it through. So actually, after this long silence, it started to give the Chinese filmmakers another hope in the 80s. And why in the 80s? I think it's very obvious that the young generation of filmmakers re-emerged. Some of them got educated even in the 50s and 60s. But after the end of Cultural Revolution, they finally got a chance to really make the film that they wanted to make. Here, I want to talk a little bit about the the generation of the Chinese filmmakers. Maybe you have heard of it. So the scholars or the film historians, they more or less agree that the most convenient, or let's say the most common way to categorize the Chinese filmmakers is to divide them into different generations. It is also very interesting to point out that this generational categorization didn't exist until the 70s or even in the 80s. It only came into existence when historians wanted to find a clear way to name different filmmakers group. They found out actually using generation is a very handy tool. Here we have actually two versions of how this idea came up. Huang Jianxin is a very famous Chinese director. He recalls that actually in the 70s, there was a book written by an American economist called The Fifth Generation. And back then, the people found out that the terms used in this book it's very good to use the terms in the book to describe the filmmakers that were very active back then. So then they thought, okay, then we take this term, the fifth generation, to name the filmmakers who were active. And this is the one version of the term. And another version is that in 1984, during a meeting in the memory of the 35th anniversary of People's Republic China, two films were shown on that occasion. One is from Chen Kaihuai called Li Zichen, and the other film was from Chen Kaige called Yellow Earth. Yellow Earth is, of course, the more famous one, Huang Tudi, from Chen Kaige. And actually, Chen Kaihuai is Chen Kaige's father. So it's funny that during one screening, two films were shown, and one from the father, one from the son. And it was at that moment that people realized, okay, then in the Chinese cinema, there is a continuation from generation to generation, from the father's generation to the son's generation. So that gave people the idea to use generation to categorize different filmmakers group. So there are just two versions of the invention of the term. We don't know which one is correct, which one is true, but they're there. If you want to have a very, very brief introduction of the different generations, I can say it very quickly. As I said, the generation didn't come into existence until the 70s. And the first thing that people say is, oh, we have the fourth generation and the fifth generation, but who are the first and second and third generation? Then you trace back and from the invention of the cinema. So in China, the first generation was the filmmakers before 1931. 1931 was the year where Japan invaded China. So before 1931, you have the first generation of Chinese filmmakers. And from 1932 to 1949, they are the second generation of filmmakers. Most of them were leftist filmmakers, like Cai Chushen, the director of Son of Fishermen. And in this specific period, especially after 1937, when Japan occupied Shanghai, most filmmakers from Shanghai, they fled to the inner land of Chongqing. And the film produced in that period were mostly about patriotism, and mostly about fighting against the Japanese. And afterwards, there is third generation, which is usually from 1949 to 1976. So these are the so-called socialist period, and especially during 1949 to 1966, lots of new grammar, new ways of filmmaking have emerged, because in the new China, people wanted to find new ways to express their ethnic and point of view and their feelings about the new society. So you can also see the transition of the leftist filmmakers from talking about fighting against the Japanese to building a new society through films. And this is the so-called 17th years. And in this period, lots of socialist classic film were born. Okay, so after the Cultural Revolution, then came the fourth generation. And as I said, these are the directors who studied in Beijing Film Academy in the 60s, but it was only after the Cultural Revolution, then making film became possible for them. And for these directors that I list here, Wu Tianming, Zhang Nuanxing, Xie Fei, Huang Shuqing, Wu Yigong, these famous names, they were actually the first generation who went to the international stage, went to the film festivals, and show the international audience what the new Chinese film can be like. So afterwards, so it's the fifth generation. Before that, I want to, the fifth generation is like the most famous generation. I mean, if you know a little bit about the Chinese film history, you would quickly notice these names: Chen Kaige, Zhang Yimou, Tian Zhuangzhuang, Hu Mei, Li Shaohou, etc., etc. So the fifth generation is the term to use to describe the filmmakers who graduated from the Beijing Film Academy in 1982. And these filmmakers, they formed a very strong team and to present the Chinese films on the international level. And it's also quite interesting to notice that actually during between the fourth and fifth generation, there was a switch of topics and switch of interest. Like the fourth generation, they are very keen on telling the stories of the countryside, and also the story of like in the story that happened in big times. Actually, in our festival this year, we curated two classic films. One is from the fourth generation, Lao Jing, the Old Whale, by director Wu Tianming, and the other one is by director Xie Jing. And you can see this from Old Whale to Xie Jing's film, The Two Stage Sisters. There is a transition of like the artistic choice and the theme. It's all different from generation to generation. And which is what is very interesting in the fourth generation, for example, is that these filmmakers, they try to establish an aesthetic to shoot the story in the countryside and with very limited resources. But at the same time, they pay lots of attention to the visual elements and to the sound and to the camera movement to show the vibe of the countryside and also the vitality of the countryside. For example, in Wu Tianming's Lao Jing, the place where they shot this film was extremely poor, and people from generation to generation, they suffered from not having enough water. But at the same time, you can see the camera is very vividly catching all these individuals and with lots of bright colors, and it's as colorful as you can imagine, even more colorful. And even the area is very poor, but on the screen you can still see people's energy and people's optimism. So for me, this is really something that categorized the fourth generation. And of course, with the impact of the fourth generation, the fifth generation came up with the same spirit. And it's interesting to mention that, for example, Zhang Yimou with Red Sorghum, Hong Gaoliang, shot in 1987, he actually won the Golden Bear of Berlinale in 1988. So it was really the highlight the very, very important moment of Chinese cinema in 1988 with this Golden Bear winning, because not only because Zhang Yimou was a newcomer back then, but also because it was the moment where the Western audience started to pay attention, started to really realize, oh, there is a country called China and people there are making films. I would say that back then it was quite isolated, and the audience in the Western countries, they didn't really have the channel to get to know what is happening in China. And it was only through film and through this cultural communication that they could see a little bit what's going on in the Far East. And Zhang Yimou was actually not a director back then. He studied cinematographer in the Beijing Film Academy, and he didn't started to shoot his own film until this very moment. And once he made this film, he won the Golden Bear. So it also showed how talented he was as a director and a cinematographer. And I don't forget that he also acted in films like Wu Tianming's The Old Well, and he was the protagonist in the film. So he was actually an actor, a director, and a cinematographer. So here the picture shows you the moment where Zhang Yimou won the Golden Bear in 1988. And together with this won, actually the five generations started to shine in festivals. And especially in the 90s, it was really the triumph of Oriental aesthetics. As Klaus Eder, who is actually a Münchener, he is a former programmer of München Film Festival, and he described that the new Chinese cinema has really dominated many film festivals, most recently in Venice in 1992 with The Story of Qiuju 打官司, and Berlin in 1993, The Woman from the Lake of Scented Souls, 香魂女, and Cannes in 1993 with Farewell My Concubine, 霸王别姬. This is a surprising and admirable series of successes which no other cinema has ever duplicated, at least not within the last 2 or 3 decades. So really in the 90s, it was the golden era of the new Chinese cinema. Especially in 1993, it's really the moment that every film goer in China would be so proud to announce, because so far Chinese cinema only won once in Cannes with this title, Farewell My Concubine in 1993. And it shared the prize of Palme d'Or, the best film, with Jane Campion's The Piano. And Jane Campion is an New Zealand female director. So this year was actually very, very remarkable because it was the first Chinese director who won the prize, and until now the only one. And also Jane Campion, just to mention very quickly, that she was the first female director who won the Palme d'Or back then. So 1993 was a very important historical moment in Cannes history as well. So on this picture is also very iconic. You can see the 3 actors from Farewell My Concubine, Zhang Fengyi, Gong Li, and Leslie Zhang. They are young but very, very happy on the picture, and people in China really feel this is the golden moment of Chinese cinema. And of course, afterwards, there are 6 generations, which I will mention later on. And the 6th generation is another transition from the 5th generation, as most of the newcomers, they want to overthrow the older generation, and they want to make something new. So we can spot a very evident or very obvious change in the films made by the so-called sixth generation. They switched the focus from the countryside to the cities. So in the sixth generations, the filmmakers work, you can see lots of urban spaces and lots of young people wandering on the street in the cities and talking about very contemporary topics. They are also very accomplished in the world cinema scene. And also they use lots of new techniques to shoot the film, because the cameras became smaller at that time, and it was more accessible for them to get all these resources, and you don't have to really shoot on the film and to make expensive films anyways. So starting from the 1990s, the sixth generation were going more independent, because before it was really the big studios who sponsor the shooting of the film, and you have to ask for special permission and quota from the studio to get all these resources you need. But starting from the sixth generation, especially after 90s, you can have like a DV, you can have a small digital camera, and you don't really need any permission. So most of them, having this free spirit, went underground or went to like more independent way of filmmaking. And in this year, you can see the very, very remarkable directors such as Jia Zhangke, Lou Ye, and these are the directors who made films outside the system. And in the year 2000, actually, Jia Zhangke's platform went to the Venice main competition, and Lou Ye's Suzhou River won the Tiger Award at Rotterdam Film Festival. So the year 2000 also marked a new beginning of like the millennium directors in China. And I think it's also quite interesting to mention that the sixth generation after that, no one has ever said something about the seventh generation or the eighth generation. And this categorization stops at the sixth generation. I think it's simply because afterwards people find it's very hard to put all these very diversified directors into certain boxes and make them seemingly belong to each other. It doesn't work. That's why lots of film scholars and historians kind of wanted to use another way to categorize the Chinese filmmakers, because this name tag actually causes problems, considering the fact that the spectrum of the personal style is wide, from urban comedy to rural myth, from gangster films to political satires. It also tends to gloss over the marked differences in a director's work over time. For example, how can we say, like, if Zhang Yimou keeps making films until now, then which generation does he belong to? If you say he's the fifth generation, but Zhang Yimou he's still making film now, and you can't say the film he makes now is a fifth generation film. So this categorization is not going to be precise anymore. Therefore, it needs to be changed. And that's why lots of film historians said the new Chinese cinema is a better term. And I do agree with that, because like the Chinese cinema, if we see it in a broader range of Chinese-speaking territories, at the same time in Hong Kong, you have the new Hong Kong cinema, you have new Taiwan cinema, because all these new generations, they came up with new ways of storytelling. So I think in mainland China, we can also regard this upcoming trend as new Chinese cinema. And this is like a more broad and therefore more precise way to replace the generational term. So therefore, after 2000, as I said, so many newcomers came along and shine at film festivals. Especially Bi Gan, I think he is really very symbolic in a way that he made his first feature film, Kylie Blues, at a very young age. When he won the Best Emerging Director at Locarno in 2015, I think he was not even 25 years old. So he was extremely young and very early recognized by the International Film Festival. And then his second film, Long This Journey into Night, was selected at Festival de Cannes, and using bigger names in his film. And I think since then, the Western Film Festival also realized that in the Chinese cinema, there are more voices to discover. Like we say, the Chinese, the festivals, they are very used to Zhang Yimou and Chen Kaige and Jia Zhangke, maybe Lou Ye's style. And they suddenly find out actually they are a younger group of filmmakers who are making totally different films. They are not paying attention to the countryside. They are not paying attention to the city. They are paying attention to themselves. So this is really a new trend by the filmmakers nowadays. They murmur, they talk to themselves, and they make very little films, very personal films. And I think Bi Gan really told this point clearly. Therefore, now the programmers of festivals, they want to look into something new, and they want to find more genuine and unique voices. Here I want to quickly mention some very important promoters of Chinese films in the West. As I said before, the Western countries, especially Europe and like European countries, are in general very interested in diversity of culture, but there was not a very smooth way for them to know about the Chinese cinema because of different reasons. One reason was the language barrier, because the film produced back then didn't really have good subtitles and translations. Therefore, it's very hard for the Western audience to understand. And second reason might be, of course, the political reason that some films were not encouraged to be shown overseas. And the third reason is that actually there was not so many foreigners who could go to China and actually talk to the Chinese filmmakers to know more precisely what they're doing. So among them, there were nevertheless some important promoters who kind of constructed the bridge between the East and the West. The most important one, I think, here is Marco Müller. He actually, I would say Marco Müller and Marie-Pierre Duhamel, they are both very important figures in promoting Chinese films. Actually, they were married for a while, and they split. They met each other in the 70s in Shenyang, actually in the northern part of China, because they were sent by the Italian and the French government to study Chinese. So they were the very first overseas student who came to China and learned Chinese. And they were very intrigued by the Chinese cinema. So back then they watched a lot of Chinese cinema, and they found out actually the real Chinese cinema was not ever introduced to Europe. So they decided to do something. Marco Müller, on one hand, he found out that in 1978 there was a Chinese film retrospective happening in Italy, but not one film that he liked was in the program. So he decided to do something new. He wanted to have his own Chinese film curation. That's why in the 80s, he actually spent 2 years in curating this special screening program, going to lots of countries in order to find the lost copies of the films. And in the end, he collected lots of films, more than 100 films, and showed them in Turin in the 80s. He showed 135 films, and it was the biggest curation ever to show the Chinese cinema back then. And afterwards, he was also the first aspect that was in touch with the fifth generation in the 90s. And he made friends with lots of very important filmmakers, including Xie Jing, because back then they were both in Shanghai. More importantly, actually, Marco Müller got the power in the festival scene in Europe. He was the former artistic director of Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland, and then he became the artistic director of Venice International Film Festival. So in the 80s, he started to send lots of Chinese films to both festivals, and of course, in between, he had some dispute with the artistic director back then of Venice, and then he got the power. So he, starting from the 90s, he really select constantly Chinese film into Venice International Film Festival, and it was under his help that Jia Zhangke's 三峡好人 Still Life won the Golden Lion of in 2006. And also the important director Zhang Yimou was invited to Venice Film Festival as the jury of the president of the jury. Also in 2010, Zhang Wu Yusen got the lifetime achievement from Venice. So Marco Müller himself did a lot to help the different generations of Chinese filmmakers to be recognized. And what is worth mentioning is that he continuously works very closely with the Chinese filmmakers now. He is now the artistic director of Pingyao International Film Festival, which is founded by director Jia Zhangke, and Marco Müller also teaches in the Shanghai University, and work constantly with young generation of filmmakers. And the second one, Marie-Pierre Duhamel, was Marco Müller's close friend, ex-wife, and a very close colleague. She graduated in Chinese study in Paris, and they worked together with Marco Müller at Venice and Locarno. And most importantly, she did lots of subtitles for Chinese films, including Bi Gan's Kylie Blue that I just mentioned. And she really kind of translated the essence of the dialogues into very good French and very good English. I had the honor to work with her once with one film that I worked with, and I could really see how professional she was. And it was also a shame that she passed away early this year, and I really want to mention her name so that you can look more into her portfolio, because she was very low-key her entire life, but she really did a lot for the Chinese cinema. The third one is Pierre Rixian. It's very funny because all these promoters, they are French. No, Marco Müller is Italian, but yeah. And Pierre Rixian, he is one of the biggest behind-the-scene promoters of the Asian cinema. So unlike Marco Müller and Marie-Pierre, Pierre Rixian actually promoted Asian film in general, but most specifically, he promoted A Touch of Sin by King Wu, 侠女 Hu Jingquan, to Cannes Film Festival. 侠女 was a very classic martial arts film, and it was during his visit in Hong Kong in the 60s that he discovered this film, and he thought it might be a fit for Cannes Film Festival. So he brought the film to Cannes. And Pierre Xiang doesn't have an official title at Cannes Film Festival, but he has been working for the festival for more than 40 years. And it's said that he's the only one who could walk in the Palais du Cinéma, the main venue of the festival, without having any badge. Basically, everyone there knows him, and they really recognize the work that he has done. And Pierre Xiang was also maybe the only one he was maybe the only one who has promoted Chinese and Asian films from 1970s to 90s, because within this period of time, there were not so many interests in the Asian films in general from European side. So he did a lot of work collecting all the copies and writing articles to give a little bit of idea to the Western audience what the Asian films look like. So now to sum up, I would like to talk a little bit about what roles do festivals play in promoting the Chinese cinema, because this is a little bit reflection that I always have, and I found some resonance by reading the reflections from other scholars, because as like in my daily work, I write emails to programmers basically every day to send them the new films from directors from China. And I can tell that for festivals, they emphasize on cultural diversity, and they like to see a film from far away country, but at the same time it's also quite Eurocentric, which means you have a certain standard of selection. You know that certain festival will select this kind of films, and the other festival will select that kind of film. It's like a pattern. So most of the festivals here, I would say, they are quite political. They want to they have already an imagination about what they want to see from a Chinese film. So sometimes it's very hard to say this film is different because it doesn't fulfill any of your expectations. So like already in the 90s, Bill Nicholas, who is an American film festival goer as well as a film critic, he did a reflection saying that the festival goers' pursuit of authenticity and intimate knowledge of an alien culture is only illusory, because that the native informants are too eager to supply evidence that will readily satisfy Western expectations. Also, Dai Jinghua, a very famous Chinese female scholar, said something similar. It's more from the Chinese perspective, saying that all the filmmakers who want to have their films selected by the festival, they also want to cater the content of the film to the expectations. So in my daily work, I also encounter some filmmakers who ask me explicitly if the film will be preferred by the film festivals. And sometimes I would tell them no, because you can't just make a film to meet somebody else's expectation. You have to speak from your mind, no? So because for young directors, it's important to get their film selected by festival and get the first exposure. Therefore, they kind of give up their original intention. And it's quite pity for me. So the film festivals, of course, they act as a very important platform to showcase the foreign culture and to bridge the gap between the East and West and different cultures. But at the same time, if there's only one standard in choosing the films for festivals, it also doesn't work. Therefore, I think it's very important to break this Eurocentrism and to kind of transfer this Western politics to a more vivid and diversified curation of Chinese language cinema, because there are different group of audiences, and especially when we want to say we represent Chinese cinema, and you ask what kind of Chinese cinema you represent, then you have to really give out all these answers. That's why I think it's very important to have a festival like ours, or like other festivals organized by people from different backgrounds, to really showcase like a spectrum of the like the real status of the industry, and what the filmmakers are really making. I think this is quite satisfying to see. There are more and more events happening in Europe organized by non-Western or non-white curators. Especially in Germany, like here we have München Chinese Film Festival, and in Hamburg, in Berlin, and in Cologne, in different cities, there are also kind of local organizers who are showcasing the Chinese cinema on a very regular basis. Of course, it takes time to cultivate the audience and to tell them this is something new that you have to watch. But I think with the time passing, there will be some changes happening in the future. And the other thing I want to say is that the film festival recognition is important. It was very glorious for Zhang Yimou, for Chen Kaige to win the biggest prize at important festivals. But at the same time, a festival recognition doesn't equal to a satisfying market performance, simply because the art house cinema is quite hard for the mass audience to accept, or it's quite difficult to promote this artistic film in the mainstream theater. So sometimes the directors, they struggle between if they should make a real art house cinema, or if they should make a cinema that is more tailored to the taste of the mass audience. So I think the festival's job is also to help them to keep this balance between artistic creation and the commercial success. So I think that will be the end of my presentation and my sharing. I hope I was clear enough, and if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, feel free to speak up, and yeah, I'm very curious about your thoughts and feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mao, for the very informative and interesting sharing about Chinese film industry and all the history and all the highlights in overseas film market. So do you have any questions? If you have any questions, please use this little tiny microphone so that our online audience can hear you clearly.
Okay. Well, I have one. So I'm very loud, actually. Okay. Thank you so much for your really informative sharing with your slides and talking. I thought last question is really interesting. So I mean, I'm already a long time in Germany. So I have the feeling when I was young and I grew up in China, and the Chinese film, like, you know, it's like, so, you know, the film is like, the background is the value, okay? The very deep, actually, each film has its his own value to show, and this value, but has very strong connection to national culture and national value. And the value for the individual person, of course, can be differently, but if it's related to the culture and that have the similarity within one cultural context. Like how can Chinese producer or register they meet the needs of Western audience? For example, if I watch the French film at the beginning of my stay in Germany, I just have the feeling I don't understand it at all because of the deep meaning, because the very deep culture which French films always can show us as audience. But like Chinese film, you show the Western audience, and they don't have this deep understanding about your culture. And their value structure and hierarchy, even in the same time period, is differently like Chinese people do have. And how do you think about that situation? And as film critiquer can tell the Chinese register how to, but I don't mean the Chinese film must fit, the Western audience needs. I don't mean that. I just mean if you want to come out and even you want to meet the value of the Western Chinese, let's say German Chinese or French Chinese, etc. And how can this soul meet together through this film? So this is my interest. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I think it's I would say here in Europe, especially, it's very hard to find the real need of the audience to see a Chinese film. It really needs time to cultivate this need, to grow, to let it grow. For example, if we compare Chinese film to Japanese film or Korean film, Chinese film, Japanese film and Korean films are more popular here because it takes them a couple of decades to cultivate the interest from the Western audience through, for example, animation, Japanese animation, or Korean genre films especially. And with the win of Parasite of Oscar, then all the Western audience was like, wow, this is like an Asian film can be. So it takes time to cultivate. And second of all, I think for those who want the foreign audience to understand their films, this is something that I always say to a Chinese director who want their films to be selected by festivals. I always told them to just tell what they want to tell, because every audience has its own interpretation. You can't tailor your film to the taste of every audience. So you just tailor it to your heart. Then it can be universal. And universality means that the Western audience can understand you, even they don't necessarily know 100% of your culture, but they can still feel the feeling and the emotions of the film. Because after all, cinema is a form of art, and art should be universal. So this is on a very ideal level, that if you speak from your heart, then you expect the other people who watch the film can understand you. Yeah, I think there's no other way around. If you just want to meet the need, then you will miss the target, I think.
Any more questions? So we also don't have any comments for, yeah, please.
But it would be necessary to give a lot of explanations because of the different cultures, different historical experiences Chinese people have, and we here in Western Europe or in America do have. So that's the lady has pointed out, that's a problem of the codes, which are always necessary to understand a film here or a film in China or somewhere else, because it's the same thing. The producers of mainstream, even if you look to films which are produced here in Europe or in France and in Germany or like that, if you look at a film which is made for the mainstream, for instance, for selling it well in the cinemas, and you look to more experimental films of the younger generations or of younger directors.
Mm.
Also in these experimental films, there is a problem to understand what they mean. It's not the evidence to everybody who went into the cinema. And if you have a film from a totally other culture, totally other codes, you have really a problem. Or you have to give together with the film a lot of additional informations about those codes.
You
For
think?
example, I think it's necessary. Oh, it's very helpful if the regisseur and they come to Germany or somewhere for the festival and explain from his perspective, to give more information about the film itself and about the context itself. Yeah, this is also what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I think that's also the main function of a film festival, because it's only during the festival that this communication, this kind of exchange can be possible. That the director or the producer, they come and tell you what the story they want to tell and have exchange. Maybe the reception from the audience is very different from what the director has expected, and this also could give him or her more insight of his or her own work. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, for our festival, we also try to give intro and also maybe afterwards Q&A to even not necessarily from the director himself or herself, but we try to establish this communication and try to not help, but to provide a little bit extra of information so that everyone can understand the film a little bit better.
I have another question. How do you consider fast food character as one of the current Chinese film character?
What do you mean fast food character?
So I have the feeling, there are some films from China, in China, are very deep, which I found is amazing, but a lot of them now, which produced in China, tend to have the character of fast food. So it's just, funny, and you watch, sometimes you watch it 30 minutes and you say, well, sorry, it's a waste of time.
But it happens. It's happening
It's not
everywhere.
just happens, it's a lot of things. This is what the part of the Chinese film character already, fast food.
Yeah, that's.
I think it's
everywhere. Yeah.
Definitely. It's not Chinese character, single Chinese character.
It's not the Chinese.
I think it's all around now, but
So,
I'm interested for how about in China, because China has so many thousand years culture. We have a lot of to offer. We have a lot of to offer, and we have such deep culture, and we have such deep, the beautiful values, etc., which you can really show from the film. So how do you consider this?
Yeah, like nowadays the young audience, their time is very fragmented. They are used to TikTok even, and like 30 minutes is considered a long time for them. So like I think for the industry, of course they want to survive and they want to provide the product that are tailored to taste of the young generation, not necessarily young generation, but the modern time. So yeah, that's sad, but that's the reality. And I think the main problem here should be how can the market or the theater really embrace all kinds of productions. You can have kind of superficial commercial productions, but at the same time, these films should not squeeze out all the space for this deeper film or the more art house films to be shown. Because in China, the industry is quite unhealthy now, just because the bigger films or the commercial films, they took all the screening rooms, and there's no place for that for art house cinemas to be shown. Even one screen in one cinema is a luxury to those films. Like maybe here the situation is better. You still have art house cinema. Like the situation in China is that we don't have so-called art house cinema. We only have like chain cinemas and maybe one or two cinematheque, which is a film archive that show classic films. But other than that, art house films don't have a home. So I think maybe your question can be turned into another question, like how can we host different kinds of films in one market? That's I think the more important question to solve. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Also, thank you for the very interesting and profound and critical questions about it. So, due to the time, we will end now, and I am so glad that we come together because of Chinese film, and I hope we can keep long-term contact. So please, I hope to meet you all again on our festivals, and yeah, also on our every month Kino this project. Thanks a lot also for the audience online. So we'll see you by the next time.
Thank you so much.